Hello, welcome to Podsongs. I'm Jack Stafford, and I interview inspiring people in service to others as inspiration for a new song. Today's guest is a very unique one. Most of my guests are promoting a book or an organization they're part of. Almost all of them are podcast veterans. But today, I have something special. And I'm going to tell you nothing about it because it's so fantastic that I want him to tell you himself. So listen carefully. This is a story you're going to want to tell again and again, so you better memorize it. The recording is a bit dodgy in some places. It was very hard to get hold of him. He's in the far-flung part of Ireland on a mobile connection. But I'm just grateful to be able to chat to him. This is an epic episode. Let's give a big warm welcome to Darragh Carroll. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat to me.
No worries at all, Jack. More than welcome.
Whereabouts are you now then in the world?
I'm in an artist retreat in South Kerry, so I'm like up in the side of a cliff in Kerry, south of Ireland. It's an old famine village that was rebuilt for artists to retreat and to write and to paint, and we have like tables there and just for artists to really have time to be out in isolation away from everything else. And there's another group of artists there, so it's kind of a collaboratory project that artists come and work together and work on different pieces and collaborate.
Oh, that's a great project.
Spread ideas. Yeah, it's been really good. I've been up here for 2 weeks now, and I'll be heading back down to the boat today.
Okay. Well, you must need a rest after all the adventures, because I haven't. I won't. I'll tell you what. When I put the podcast out in the show notes and in the subject, I won't tell anyone what it's about, because it's such an incredible story that it's nice that people hear it kind of gradually. It's like in your own words, because I can't really explain what you did. I can't boil that down into some little snappy line. So maybe you could just give us a bit of backstory about how it started out, and kind of in your own words.
Yeah. So where the kind of magic began to happen was when I came up with an idea in Ireland, a culinary idea, because I'm a chef and I've been traveling the world for the last 8 years, working in different restaurants around the world. And I had kind of finished working for other chefs and wanted to kind of go on a culinary venture myself. So I'm very much into traveling culture, and very much into wild nature, as in nature, plants, and being part of nature and out in the wild. So I was looking at a bow-top gypsy wagon, the old bow-top traveling wagons?
Yeah, beautiful.
And a horse. So what my plan was originally, before the boat and everything else, was to drive around with a horse and a bow-top wagon with a customized kitchen in the wagon. And I would go from glamping site to glamping site, being like a pop-up traveling chef that would be collecting lots of wild ingredients along the way. And that was kind of what was going through my mind. So I went to a horseman in Ireland, a very good horseman who does 4-horse carriage driving, Paddy Hanley. And I spent 2 months living and driving horses and learning all about the horses, because to find a horse that I needed was very difficult. No one sells them because they work well and they're very well trained and a very good road horse. So it's very hard to find them. So it took us 2 months to find the horse. Now, the day Samphire arrived was when the magic kind of the bigger picture of the depth of the journey kind of really came into play. So the horse arrived, and I'm looking at a bit of a bill. Like, I'm looking at the wagon's going to cost, the customizer is going to cost a few bob, and the horse is going to cost a few bob. So I was like, on that day, I got a phone call from Norway, on an island of Trimea, a very rural island in Norway, to say, if you could come over to Norway and work in the restaurant. We have a restaurant here. My friend is just opening it up. If you could come over and give him a hand for the season, it'd be brilliant. So I then took him up on that offer because I was like, I'm looking at this, and I told Paddy, I can come back in 6 months and I'll be able to, pay for the horse, the wagon, and the whole lot. If you can just keep the horse here for 6 months. And Paddy is no problem because he's like 50, 60 horses. So he's so many different places to keep horses. And so I went over to Norway to this little island called Trimea. Very, very magical, special island. So on this little island, I was working as a chef. Now, the nature and the wildlife and the ingredients I got to use in this island were fantastic. We were using a lot of wild foraged food. The chef was very much into wild foraged food, as in mushrooms and everything. Kind of, sorry, I'm just going off there. So he was really into wild food, and this island was abundant in like natural wildlife diversity and really flourishing in vibration. Like it had a glow to it. The whole island had a real sense of flourishment in its fertility, So there's even the mix of trees and plants and birds, and you could collect oysters and mussels on the way to work. It was beautiful in that sense. So I'm on this island, and while I'm on the island, I'm cycling to work every day, and I'm cycling past these cliffs, and I'm kind of reading rocks. I set to work a lot with looking through cliffs and looking into cliffs and just staring at them. Like what staring at a cliff or what staring at a rock might seem to someone as nothing. For me, I see where my creativity or where my mind, I let natural frameworks kind of come into my thought pattern. Now, whether that's staring at a rock and letting a rock speak to you is another thing, or going into a forest. When you're walking through a forest and you start to get the ideas in your head, and people just think, oh, I just thought of that day. But you really have to make sure where you are has a big impact on where your imaginative composition is coming from. The power of the space, the rocks, the land itself. So while I'm on the island, I was doing a lot of meditating and a lot of visionary work, as in visionarily manifesting different things in my mind, And as I was lighting fires in the forest and in a few of these different mounds. And during this time when I'm lighting these fires, just this urge is coming through. This real deep inner urge that I had to carry the spirit of this island, as in the spirit of abundant nature and fertility that was here. It was just whistling through the wind into my ear consistently. And I'm like, how am I going to do this? What? And then I lit a fire one night, and it just came to me that the fire was going to transport the spirit from this place to what in my mind I seen an eye in the center of Ireland during all this. So it had to go into the center of Ireland to create an impulse that would go through the land, as in Ireland would be the heart, and the heart needed to pulse for a vibrational spirit, for the natural wildlife to flourish and become more abundant. I'm more acknowledged within the human race. So now this is not the selling in my mind. I'm like, man, this is mad. It's fire. Like you can't bring a physical fire from one place to another. So it's just the thought that's in my mind. I'm like, man, I wonder if that could work. Like, could it work? What way would it work? Would it actually work out? Like, what would happen if I actually done it? There's something telling me to do it. And then one day, I'm like, the shores on the ground as you're walking down roads. I started to see sailboats on the shores. And when I'd walk into someone's house, there'd be just paintings of sailboats everywhere. So the symbology, I'm very into much looking at the symbology of the space that you're in, and looking at different symbols and clues to whether you're in the right or wrong place, or you're kind of journeying off direction or you're journeying right direction. So I started to see all these little symbols of old sailboats, and there just happened to be a big wooden sailboat festival, but it hadn't clicked in my mind at all, because I was still thinking that this was a mad idea, never going to work. You're not going to be able to walk from here to Ireland with a fire like going the whole time. So I was like going through the motions of that. And then I'm sitting on a harbour one day. I'm just sitting there. I was having a few beers on a day off work, sitting in the sun, enjoying myself. And this black boat pulls up, like a pirate ship pulls up, like big black tarred boat with a big dragon on the front and symbols kind of carved into the side. So I'm like looking at the boat, and there's so much character to the boat. that I was like, I just have to talk to the captain because it just seems like a very interesting person to be sailing such a boat. So I went over and this big guy gets out, right? And he has like half his face is gold teeth, a big hoop earring, and a big chain of Thor on his neck, like a big Viking pirate, really, basically. And I was just like, oh, what's the crack? Like, what's the story with your boat? Like, how old is it and everything? And he's just telling me all about the boat. And he's like, so have you sailed? And I was like, I've done a bit of sailing in Mexico. I spent a few months in Mexico on different boats as a tour guide. I got trained in and was bringing tourists around the sea lock. And he was like, well, I could really use a deckhand to get from here to Grimstad, which was 50 miles south at the time. So I said, perfect, give me a half an hour. I have 3 days off work. I'm definitely going to be on. It's a beautiful sunny day. Why wouldn't they want to go? So I jump on the boat and we sail away, having the crack. He's sailing into the sunshine. All's landy dandy. We're having the crack. And he was like, so where did the fire go? And I'm like, what do you mean, where did the fire go? He's like, there was something on fire. Like, what is it, a car or a boat? And I was like, what are you talking about? He was like, in the harbour. And I couldn't pick, I was like, nah, I didn't see anything. Like, there was nothing there. He was like, the reason why he came into that harbour that harbour was a 3-mile inlet and a 3-mile offset. So a 6-mile off his beaten track to get in and out. So he went in, went out, because he thought that there was a boat on fire. There was a car on fire in the harbour. So he came into the harbour that day to have a look at what was going on. Like, he was seeing people at the end of the harbour waving and everything. So when he came into the harbour, it was just me. Now, I'm looking at this and going, this just gets really wild. And I'm looking at the symbology in the boat, you know, and it's all connected to the same kind of visionary work that I've been doing. And I'm like, wow, this is getting really into things, you know? So I was like, so I started telling him about the fire. I was like, you know, the island of Tremoy, that's where I'm working. And, you know, I've been lighting all these fires and there's just instinct to come through me to carry a fire from here to Ireland. And he's like, okay, you know, and he's taking all this on board. And he's like, you have to come up to my house. I have another big stone circle at the side of my house, an ancient pagan site. So I went up and we had a big hoolie that night and a little big fire in the middle of a stone circle. 2 of us, like pirates, drank whiskey and wine and danced around the fire for the evening. And the next day he's like, you know, you have to do this. I have everything that you need to do this. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I have the boat, I have the wood, I have the stove, I have a stove that we can fit into the boat. And then there's lads that are down at the harbour that can fix up your boat so it's strong for the sea. So it's like really ready to get in for a sea journey. So this was all going through my mind. I'm like, wait, I didn't even agree to this. I didn't sign up yet, but I'm kind of already in it and I don't know. So he was like, if something is generally hard to do, it'll generally be you're trying to do something that you shouldn't be doing, or you're going in the wrong direction. But if something opens up like this, as if like the universe kind of just opened and said, you know, you have a journey that you must do and we will help you along the way, but you need to commit. And if you commit, everything will work out, you know? So I'm like, okay, this is mad. It's November time. It's about to get into winter. And then I start to do get into the meditation really, because I was like, right, if I'm getting into this, I really need to think this through, because this is the sea with a live fire. A lot of people are going to think you're so mad. It's winter time. You know? So I'm doing kind of getting into the meditation and it's just coming true that, you know, it's right. Trust in the elements. So it was like that you're going to be journeying with your great grandmothers and great grandfathers are going to be with you on this journey. Now, I didn't realize half of the stuff that I know now at the start, as in the depth of the journey. I was just kind of, something in me was just constantly saying, man, you have to go, you have to fix the boat, you need to get the fire going, keep the fire going, just keep that fire going, and it's going to keep you safe the whole way. So I was like just in that, but I hadn't really got into it until later on in the journey. So the harbour that the lads were down at a harbour, and it was one of the last travelling or say gypsy harbours of Norway. So in Norway, you have a travelling culture that's descendants of the Vikings. As the big Viking families descended into normal society, they ended up as travellers who moved from place to place around the Norwegian coastline, fixing boats. And then when the wooden boat industry kind of depleted, they didn't have as much work, and a lot of them moved inland, and then the Norwegian government offered them a lot of housing. But the place that my boat was at was one of the last camps where there was quite a big collective of community there. So they still had a great sense of wooden boat culture there, and kind of traveling culture and Viking lineage. So they were really great big pirates that were helping me along the way, And so on the 15th of November last year, I lit the fire on the island, put the fire onto the boat. Now, on the boat, I had a lot of special wood that was collected around a lot of different hard, old oak forests up around where the owner of the boat lived, because he knew the wood and knew the woods. So he was like, I have specific woods that you can carry. They're going to be hardwoods and they're going to last a long time. So we filled the boat with about 1 ton of hardwood. So the whole boat kind of went down quite a lot when we filled it with wood, So I set sail. I left Tremere, had a ceremony there. We lit the fire, put the fire onto the boat, sailed from the east coast right around to the west coast, where I was picking up a crew. I picked up a man named Bart from Denmark. And that went very smoothly. East coast, west coast. From the 15th, I arrived in Stavanger. And up Stavanger, I arrived on around the 21st. So it was 6 days, very smooth sailing from the east coast to west coast. This is now, I'm only getting into understanding the sea, really. I'd spent some time on a sea lock and catamarans, but this is me getting to know the sea and the boat. It's a 28-foot boat. It's like 7.5 ton. It's a much bigger operation than a little catamaran to be sailing.
How many people do you need to sail a boat like that?
Ideally 3. Ideally 3 for big voyages like this. But I was so almost in a trance that I was really high the whole time. I had energy flowing through me. Like I could go days without sleeping and just keep going. I was really in a heightened sense. I was feeling the winter coming in and the energy from the sea and everything, and it was all kind of flowing through me and creating a really energetic me.
Yeah.
So I met a man named Bart in Haugesund, and we spent another week sailing up the west coast of Norway, and then we went for the crossing. Me and Bart were ready. We were packed. We knew the first day there was going to be around 25 knots of wind. It was coming in northwesterly, so we're like, it's not the best, but we were like, if we get out there and get the first 50 kilometers done, the next 3 days is going to be smooth sailing, because there's going to be easterly winds for the next 3 days. So if we can just cross that 50-mile mark with a bit of heavy weather, we'll be all right then, because we'll be ahead of schedule then, which we shouldn't have done. It was a bad idea. So we sailed it was the middle of the night when we set sail. It was just by the weather and the wind why we set sail in the middle of the night. And sailing into the dark North Sea with a fire blazing on a wooden boat was not necessarily the easiest of tasks. Because that's when you're not going to see land, and then it's just you to see. And if anything does go wrong, you're calling in backup. Not going to be there in an hour or two. Like, it's going to be a very long time.
November, yeah.
And this is December. So this is December, 1st of December.
Wow.
Coming into December. So we were crossing December. Weather window was there, and after the first 50k, waves start plummeting, smashing the front deck. The front deck kind of came down a little. There was a big space that was created in between the deck and the mast, so we had a lot of water coming in the front. Boat rocking heavily. The two of us are tied in. The boat's getting really smashed, and we're like, we gotta turn around. But before we decided that, the battery, because there was an engine on the boat at this stage, and the battery from the engine room, it fell, broke from its frame, and landed into an impeller wheel. So the engine started to blend. The battery, I swapped the Danish guy, jumped down because I could hear it in the engine room, opened it. And at this stage, when you're opening an engine room, the boat's like going 45 degrees from one side to another, and it's just smashing the engine or the battery into pieces, And this is a 1964 huge tractor engine. So that's obliterating my battery. So the battery is now obliterated, and the electric pumps that are pumping the water that's coming in, out, have just stopped. So now the boat's really filling with water. Because without the pumps, like you could have a quarter of a ton or a half a ton of water in the boat in an instant, in a flick of a capping wave that could roll over the side. And if you have a heavy roller come into the cockpit, you could have a half a ton of water very quickly in the cockpit. So in this situation, I'm like, shit, turn the boat around. We got to go back. And then it was like literally bailing with buckets.
But the engine was still running. You were running on the diesel engine.
Yeah, so the engine was still running at this stage, and we're the battery's gone. So if the engine cuts out now, we're just down to sails, and the wind had picked right up. So using even a sail in this would have been like very hard, like to not rip sails and not rip the rigging completely, So we turned around and spent another 14 hours bailing while we got back, and then eventually we got back. And the beds are soaked, our sleeping bags are completely soaked. The only thing that's keeping us alive right now is the fire that we're just keeping going, because that's what's keeping the cabin dry, and we're like pulling our mattresses around it and just keep the fire as hot as possibly can to dry and steam off everything. So then I'm back in Norway with a smashed up boat, thinking, what am I doing? Not only do I have a smashed up boat and a mad idea that no one is gonna I can't tell anyone about this now. Like I don't know what to do now.
What did the Danish guy think?
He was like, he loved the adventure of it. Bart, he just like, it's wild, but I love the wildness of it all. He was a great character, great spirit, and but when we got back, he had to get back to his life, because he was like, man, like, you have a lot of work to be done on the boat, and it's getting into wintertime and the weather's not looking great, so I'm gonna have to head back to Denmark, and if the weather does get better and you do manage somehow to fix the boat, and just give us a call, and I'd be interested in doing it again. So I was like, okay, man. Then like a magical man appeared, which just gave me full motivation that I knew I was doing the right thing and the right time, and that the energy that was needed to carry the fire appropriately without any confusion had to be solely me, because I was the one that was carrying the full belief, and that full belief had to run through the boat. And that acknowledgement came when I was in the storm with the Danish man. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with the Danish man or he didn't believe. It was just the fact that I had to do this alone for it to actually work, So a Norwegian or a Swedish guy arrives, and he's like, so it was really interesting boat, where did you get it? And I'm telling him about the story, and he's like, oh wow, man, that sucks that he's got smashed, but I've 3 weeks off work, and there's an island 4 miles west of here called Rover, and if you can sail over there, I've like a boatyard full of tools. I'm an engineer on marine engineer on boats, and I have 3 weeks off work.
My God!
So I'm like,
you got to do it.
Okay. That this means that I gotta do it. Like, you don't just meet random people that are like, I got a boatyard and I have 3 weeks off work to help you. So I'm like, I gotta do this again. I was almost getting a sense of relief that it was over.
Oh my God.
So at this stage, I spent 10 days with the man from Rover,
Mm-hmm.
and he taught me how to sail, use paper charts, all different anchoring techniques, wind techniques, a lot of things that he set me down and gave it to me very straight, as in, man, you're gonna die. If you don't know these basic stuff, emergency stuff, like what happens if your boat goes down, like you lose all radios, you lose everything. What happens then? And we had those few rough conversations where he was just really giving it to me straight,
Mm.
and it was amazing because he just brought me through the whole process. And after the 10th day, he didn't really want me to leave because I was like, man, there's a weather window, and he's like, don't do it, man. He's like, it's winter time. He's
Yeah.
like, you can leave the boat there till spring. It's not a good enough weather window. I'm not advising you to leave. This is highly unadvisable, really, really dangerous. And I'm just like, I'm feeling it, and I'm a very instinctive person. So I just went, right, I'm going. And I just set sail into the North Sea again, second time.
In winter, in the middle
And
of winter.
in the middle of winter time at this stage, yeah. So it was like really, first day was rough. And then I had 3 beautiful days.
Oh.
Absolutely beautiful sail, no complications, arrived to Shetland. I didn't sleep at all. So it was 4 days of not sleeping.
You're
So
feeding the fire. You have to feed the fire constantly, yeah?
you're consistently awake with the fire. So as in that's your kind of motivation, your heat, your warmth, your spirit. It's the center. And it was like the grandfather, like the old grandfather that I just had to keep an eye on, and keep him happy, like just keep him happy in the morning in the corner. And he was like teaching me, talking to me. And after 2 days of no sleep, the third day you'd start hallucinating quite a lot, and the fatigue, really, it'd be almost like a sense, you get into a sense of trance where, like people would fast to have like visionary states of mind. Very similar when you wouldn't sleep for a good few days. I was having very similar effects in my body and mind. But I arrived to Shetland and the sun was just rising, and I could just see a huge cliff of Shetland that just knew the biggest leap was done. And the biggest leap of the journey was complete, and I made it. And I just keeled over in Shetland and was just like, oh wow, I can't believe I made it across the North Sea in the middle of winter time. And people couldn't believe it. They were like, so where did you come from on the boat? And they're like, Norway. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
In this time of year on that boat? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, what's the crack with the smoke? And I'm like, well, I have a fire going. And they're like, but it's a wooden boat. Like, why do you have a fire going on a wooden boat? And then I took a few days rest then in Shetland, and then started moving down the Orkney Isles. But that's when sailing, just the dynamics of sailing in the top of Scotland is you need to be very, very skillful, and really, I was in the deep end. Really, really in the deep end at the top of Scotland. The weather was so dramatic and could change so quickly, and the currents could go against the wind, and everything could just change in a matter of a few minutes. So it was really, really volatile in that sense. So I made it down to the Orkney Isles. I had to make it around Cape Wrath. Cape Wrath is like one of the most dangerous sailing quarters in Europe, because you have a Minch, you have an Atlantic, and you have a North Sea, all kind of meeting at one corner. So it's a really dangerous, unpredictable place that you really have to be aware of your time tides. And I was sailing in a full moon at this time from Orkney to a place called Kinlochbervie, a 70-kilometer sail. And during the 70-kilometer sail, I was going around Cape Wrath. And as I was going around Cape Wrath, I was like, I don't know what all the fuss is about. Like, this is fine, And then like a half an hour later, I was like, boof, holy shit, now I know what Cape Wrath is. And it's like massive, huge, like 2-story bus waves rolling at you. And I'm just like, shit.
Like a wall of water.
And the wind, huge. Like you're going up mounds, like massive mounds, like riding up the top of massive mounds and riding back down them. And I'm like, shit, I really don't feel comfortable in this weather. This is really not good. And I don't think I'm going to make it back to Orkney. I just don't have enough like fuel. And I'm like, do I go back to Orkney or do? And I'm like, I already made it. It was like 60 kilometers. I had 10 kilometers left, but I was caught in an undercurrent of a hib tide that was bringing me actually further out into the Atlantic. And I was just not moving at all. The boat was actually starting to go backwards. So at this stage, I have an engine. The wind is picking up. And the next day, Storm Brendan is coming in. But the start of Storm Brendan was already, it was already there. And I was like, yeah, I thought this was going to be the calm before the storm, but this is more just like the storm has already started and you're in the middle of it.
Storm before the storm.
I'm like, shit. Yeah, so I was like, what happened to the calm before the storm? I thought that was a thing. Like, and so I went up to a place called Loch Erible, and I turned off the engine because I knew my diesel was running low, put up the sails, sailed all the way up into Loch Erible. Loch Erible is a Highland sea loch in the height of the Highlands in Scotland. So massive, massive cliffs all around. And when I was coming in, I could see in the cliff sides of the cliffs like faces of all the elders, as if it was like on the side of a Roman building, like all the faces, but it was on the side of like a huge cliff. And I'm looking at it and I can feel the presence of very old, natural, ancestral energy. And I can feel it, and it doesn't feel so. It's just like this energy that I know something's going to happen, and it is for the benefit of me, but it's not going to be so pretty. And I'm just like, I don't know, there's some really deep teaching here, but I don't know what it is, and I can feel it in my stomach, and I don't know what's going to happen. So I have this feeling in my stomach that this is going to be deep. I don't know what it is, but I have a feeling that there's something's going to happen in the next few hours. Or I was thinking as well, maybe Loch Erible is just a really powerful place and I'm just meant to stay there for a little while. So I was kind of trying to see the bright side of the feelings I was having. So I made it up to Loch Erible, and there's no harbour in Loch Erible. There was mooring buoys kind of in different places, but I didn't know about them at the time. So I was thinking if I get right down the end of the loch, I'll be sheltered by the Highland Mountains. Yeah. I'll just be able to drop an anchor. And I dropped 2 anchors down the end, and Storm Brendan came in. And this is that. By the time I got up there, it was about 12 o'clock at night. I'd been sailing for about 28 hours. I dropped the 2 anchors. I was just like cooking a little bit of food, and I'm just listening to the wind outside, and I'm just listening to it pick up, pick up, pick up, pick up. And what I didn't know at the time, when you have southerly wind in Loch Erible, it creates a vortex that comes through the Highlands and amplifies the wind completely. So then when Storm Brendan came up, I was just anchors ripped, boat blasted through the loch. And the front of the boat was catching because the anchors are still off, you know. Yeah. And at this stage, the wind had got so violent that I couldn't even stand up fully on the deck. As in, I had to crawl down on the deck, pull up the anchors while the boat was getting blown down. I turned on the engine with the last bit of diesel I have, and I'm driving, trying to battle the wind for another 5 hours now. Just even keeping the boat straight in this sort of wind is hard. Like, it just goes to the side, and then you get pushed down the loch, and there's rocks everywhere. There's a big island in the middle, and there's rocks all on either side, and I'm going, I could lose the boat, you know. Or the other option is that I go back out to sea, and I was like, there's no way the storm's going to pick up, and then you could possibly die. At least if something happens here, I won't die. You know, I could swim to shore. So I'm looking at a beach, and at this stage, I'm completely wrecked. The wind is still picking up, and I'm like, if I put up a sail now, it's going to be ripped to shreds. So if the engine goes now, if the diesel goes now, I'm gone. The boat's at the complete mercy of the wind. So I have to use the last control that I have and try bank the boat on the side of a beach. So I seen the beach. Well, it was completely winging. Like, there could have been rocks. There could have been anything underneath it. But I just had to kind of go for it. I had to save the boat and just bank her in. Because if I was going to lose it, it could have ended up anywhere that I wouldn't have been able. So I seen a little light, tiny little light of a cottage. So I was like, if I can get the boat as close to that cottage, I can get help. So I drove the boat right into the beach, smashed into the beach, and I lost kind of 2 boards as I smashed into the beach. So 2 boards sprung. So the boat started filling with water. It didn't fully fill, the side of it kind of filled. Then the tide receded, and then the next morning a high tide came in. And this high tide was like one of the highest tides of a month. So it's a full moon high tide. So only once in like a 3 hour period in 3 days does a tide actually go that high. So I was like right up the top of the beach, and the next morning the like water came in, like swamped the whole engine room. So the engine room's like completely gone. Half of the boat is like soaking. I am like on top of the boat, and I'm like, it's a storm also. So I make it over to a cottage, a little cottage just over, and I'm knocking on the house, and there's no one in the cottage, and there's like this really nice furniture, and I'm looking at it. It looks a bit like a holiday home, you know. And I opened the front door, and it's like open. So I was like, okay, there's no one here. It looks like a holiday home, so I'm just gonna go in and yeah, I had a shower and took on the kettle, had a cup of coffee, and then the police came and they were like, "Get out of the house!" And I'm like, "What's going on?" And yeah, I came out and I just had a jacket on with nothing else underneath, and I'm like totally naked. And police are like, "Put your hands out!" And like naked Irish guy in the middle of nowhere. What's going on with this guy? Like, and yeah, I eventually talked to the police. That told them about the story. I have this fire, and I need to get it to the centre of Ireland, and I'm shipwrecked. And they're in a volatile place themselves, because it's like an hour and a half drive to the nearest shop where we are, rural wise. So for them, if I am a drug dealer and I do have partners with me and we do have guns, it's not a great place for them. So they're kind of on edge in that moment. And then yeah, I tell them about the story, and then amazingly, loads of locals from the Highlands, absolutely amazing people in the Highlands, they all came down. They even brought a tractor down, and we pulled the boat up the beach a little bit more with ropes, and it was a huge effort by the local people. Like local fishermen came down. We all had the crack for the day. I still hadn't slept, so this was like getting into the like 48-hour period. There's like lots of people arriving, and I just looked completely mad because you know. Yeah. And yeah, so I ended up being there for 2 months.
And had the fire gone out in the storm?
Yeah, so this was like a very deep teaching for me. This is where like the deepest of the teachings of the fire actually came in. So what it was saying was that I wasn't appreciating all 4 of the elements. I was journeying with an ancient ancestor of the fire, but I wasn't appreciating the other 4, as in the water and the wind. I was using an engine. So what it was saying to me was that if you want to continue this journey and you want to complete it with full respect and honor for the 4, do it properly. And do the vision that you see, and you have to do it in conjunction to the 4. So you have to forget the engine. You have to forget the deadlines. Because in my head, I was like, oh, I have to be home. I should really be home before this. Or I had deadlines in my mind. And then I was using engine. Like if the wind went the wrong way, I would stick on the engine. If the current went the wrong way, I would stick on the engine. They were like, yes, you're very connected to the fire, but you're forgetting completely about the other 2, like the water and the wind. So you're not going to complete this in full respect, and it won't be honored truly unless you forget about the engine. Now, for us to test your strength, if you can refloat this boat here, then you will have the honor of carrying the fire from here, out of here, into the hands of all 4 of the elements, and we will help you to get home and bring the fire to the center of Ireland. So in my mind, I was like, okay, I understand, and I thank you for stopping me in my tracks, because it would have been almost like, it wouldn't have been as real if I had just kept going with the engine and just made it to Ireland in a few weeks, like 3 weeks. it would have been almost like a commercial trip rather than really getting into the depths of letting go and being carried by all four of the elements. So at this stage, I'm stuck on the beach. My boat is smashed. I'm like, what do I do? Like, is this the end? And but where I landed in the Highlands in Scotland, there was a 200-year rewilding plan for the land, and all the side of the mountain was all this small little birch trees that were coming up. So I was like, okay, the fire is working. I know there's a deeper journey, but where you have landed has a very deep meaning for where it is right now, for the land that's actually here. Because sometimes we have ideas and we have targets in our mind, but it's not necessarily the destination that you've been thinking, you know? So within this, I'm looking at how I manifested a 200-year rewilding plan that has been dedicated to half of the Highlands. So in this, I'm like, okay, it's working. Like the fire is actually creating this in your reality. So with this, I'm then stuck on the beach. Local fishermen came down with materials, and there was a lot of people foraging on the seashore. And I went down and asked them what they were foraging, and they were foraging periwinkles. So they were making a fair bit of cash during winter time, because during winter time it was $3.50 a kilo for periwinkles on the shore. So I then start working with the guys picking periwinkles and making it quite decent rates in the Highlands of Scotland. Like, there's no other way you're gonna find a job doing anything else there. Like, and so to get the boat back out, I needed to wait for a full moon high tide. So I have to wait for a full moon. For me to wait on a full moon meant that there was 3 days in a month that the water was going to go high enough for me to get the boat back out, because it was too risky to try pull it back out with another boat. You could have had anything happen. So I waited a full month, and the boat's ready, and the water's coming in, and the boat half goes up and like smashes back down, and I'm looking at all the repairs that I spent so long doing, and the wind is back, Highland wind, like just always windy, and wind is blistering. First month, the boat doesn't float. I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna be here for another month, like a full more month. I'm gonna be stuck on these rocks, and so I do it for another month. I pick periwinkles.
Did you live
on the boat?
Oh, you lived on the boat. Okay.
Yeah. So I was on the boat. They did let me stay in the cottage for the first week. For the first week, I was like in the cottage. It's a beautiful cottage, with a beautiful stove, and it was like an amazing week. But then I was like, I really need to get back out. It's just too comfortable. I need to be with the boat. I need to be fire in the boat.
Yeah.
I can't be like, they're just not part of the journey. Like, it's not to do. It has nothing to do with the teachings. Being in the house, you know. So I'm then the next month I get the boat afloat, and the boat's back up, the fire is back in full spirit, and we journey on again. We make it. Well, when I got the boat back out, it was just as bad weather as when I came in. Like, the Highlands, you know, and I had done all the repairs myself, so I'm looking at the repairs going, not so great job on the repair there. You know, it's like a really nice stream coming through the center of the boat at this stage. And I'm like, oh, it just got really sketchy, because now the boat's not so strong. Like, I cracked some ribs and I had done all the repairs. So it was like, and I was just like, trust it. They said they were going to help you out. They'll help you out. You'll be fine. It's going to be okay.
Was the battery working to pump the water out?
Yeah, I had that working off solar panels.
Oh, okay.
So I had 2 solar panels on top that were just directly connected to the battery, and they were able to work the pumps off them, and I was able to like charge a phone off them and like have a navigational system on the phone for checking out rocks and this sort of stuff, just from 2 big solar panels on top that were quite strong. And eventually then I started sailing with the wind, and you know, it was a lot of the deeper teachings with the wind. Like, when you've no engine, your boat, you're sailing. In a storm. But it was actually, I learned quite a lot about sailing that I would have never learned with an engine. And I think a lot of sailors wouldn't learn a lot of the things. You really need to like sail without an engine for a long period of time to learn small little techniques that make a huge difference. And I was doing a lot of anchoring then, like anchoring behind islands and sides of coves, and that can be quite sketchy as well because as soon as you pull up an anchor, you've boats floating towards the rocks, and you've only the wind to get you out of the cove. So a lot of very close calls, you know.
On a huge boat like that, just you yourself, you know what I mean?
Yeah, by myself managing all the sails. Then when I didn't have an engine, like there was a lot longer progressing times with no sleep, and I had the fire going, and like the boat was because it was very important to me that I'd sailed with the fire going all the time for my mind. Because I was like, man, if this fire goes out, I just think that this could get really dangerous, like deadly dangerous, if the fire goes out, and just from the spirit of it, you know. So it all went quite well though. The sailing without the engine I actually quite love, but now it's getting into springtime. So I was January, February, March, and weather's getting much better, and it's like sunny days. The storms are just about over, and I eventually make it down to Dublin, met all my family, and they all came down to the boat, made it around to the west coast of Ireland, kept the boat in the west coast of Ireland. A friend of mine, she came down, she looked after the fire. She stayed with the fire for a few days while I went up to Paddy Hanley that had the horse that I had priorly been working on a different project. And he's like, what? I thought you were meant to be, you know, driving. Where did you get the boat? What's going on with it? And, you know, this is an old horseman, and I'm trying to tell him about this sacred fire. And he's like, what? You crossed the sea with it? And, yeah, so he gives me a few days with the horse, and it was a 125-year-old cart from Leon that was going to be transporting the fire through the communities and through Ireland and into Ishnock, which is the oldest ceremonial site in Ireland, the very centre of Ireland, and the most distinct. Or if you were to look at cathedrals in a place, Ishnock would be like the oldest form of a cathedral in Ireland, the oldest place of worship in Ireland that had never been taken over by the Catholicism or the Catholic Church. It was always kept. The Druids. Yeah. They still work there now. A lot of Druid societies, pagan societies, different witches and women of the hill, and there's a lot of ceremonies and rituals that still happen around and in and out of the hill. Very powerful place. So so the fire was like bringing an inspiration when it got onto land, as in when we got onto land and started the journey through the land, it would really brought the fire to a lot of communities and really brought inspiration during very dark times of the COVID. So the COVID was still around. People were going in and out of lockdown, and you just see this madman going down the road with a horse and cart and smoke pumping out the back of the cart. Like, so it brought a lot of light. Like I was carrying a light, and it did bring a lot of light because I work as a chef. So we would, I was getting donated so much food I couldn't eat. Like there was places that the local people were donating so much that I just said, okay, we're going to have a cook up in the local field. And like I'd tell one or two people from the community, if you could tell everyone in the community, I'll be cooking dinner, and dinner will be served at like 6:30. The first place, Carsavine, we had a full lamb donated to us. So we had a full lamb put up on a spit, and we had the fishmonger came down with 8 massive hake. So we hung those all around, and we cooked for like local refugees that are in a hotel here. We cooked for like 30 people came down, and we cooked up a big storm. And we done that a few times because people were contributing a lot of food. So we just cook up and tell people, you know, it's outdoors, you're safe from the COVID. We still have all the regulations in place. Like we'll still be all keeping our distance. And it was amazing to just inspire. And from the inspired, there was just a symbiosis of giving, that people were opening up space for me to stay with the horse. And it was just absolutely phenomenal generosity from the local people, and we'd have trad music, like Irish traditional music, and people storytelling and singing, and it was a very, very beautiful to see the fire on land after so much we had been through together. So when we were on land, it was very beautiful to see the fruits of kind of what had been done. And this was when it was joining the earth. So it was like the fire, I only realized it kind of now that the fire was actually traveling through the sea in its heightened most state. So when the sea was at its fullest, water, she was at its fullest, the wind was at its fullest peaks of energy. The fire was then going through it to accumulate that them senses of energy in their heightened form. So then when the fire got to the land, it was like spring, summer. So everything was like abundant, the wildlife and everything was in its fullest. So then the fire traveled through the land also while it was in its fullest. So the timing of everything was like perfect in that sense.
I see it, yeah.
So it was it would just made sense of why I had to spend 2 months in Loch Arable and why I had to lose the engine, and it all made sense when I kind of came into the summertime and I could feel the land was in its fullest in this time. And then I was thinking, but the winter was in it, the water was in its fullest, and then I'm just thinking these things through afterwards of why the timing was, and in the end we met so many different communities and inspired so many different people while we were on land. And there was actually a community of people that traveled with me. I had a crew. There was like 8 different people that came onto the voyage and on the cart, and I had lads cycling on front and lads cycling on back, and we were camping in all different places and cooking for lots of people. And the horse was amazing. So he was a trad cob, a traditional cob, 15 hands,
Wow.
big heavy horse,
yeah.
Big heavy cart. It was very like the boat, like it was very delicate journey, as in everything could go to shit in the matter of an instant. Like it was, so delicate that it, like, and especially with so many community, like keeping the fire going when it was on land was very difficult, as in it was a lot harder than when it was on the boat. Because on the boat, your sleeping pattern would revolve around, because you'd have a stove, but you could lower down the oxygen level on the stove. So you could have a smoldering fire in there for hours, like 8 to 10 hours. You could keep a good steady flame and good steady heat off a stove. But when we were outside, it was just in like a big bowl. So then the wind would affect the burning of the fire. So some windy nights were like really long nights for me. And chopping up late, chopping wood and keeping it going. So there was a lot of tough days on the road as well. And because we had a crew, I was leading the crew, so I was kind of carrying the crew in a sense, as in everyone needed direction consistently. So, I was this was all taking a toll, as in there was a lot of people around, and I was just, continuing going with the fire. So I got like very tired halfway through the land journey. And kind of had to go solo then again. So I went solo then again, just by myself, just to really connect with myself and the land without kind of distraction or need to look after anyone else or, conduct anything. Kind of, I just wanted to kind of be time to myself. So I then journeyed solo for a little bit, and people would come in and out every now and again and pick up community, and eventually got to Ishnock. So I got to St. Bridget's Well in Ishnock, that we kept the fire there. It was amazing when we arrived in St. Bridget's Well. The water hadn't been flowing there, and we arrived with the fire, and the water started to flow fully into the well. It was very, very powerful, really beautiful spot. And the fire was like, it was like when we brought it in and put it down, it was almost as if we just poured a load of petrol on it.
Wow.
It was just like really beautiful.
Did you notice the character of the?
To know, for me, that I.
Did you notice that the character of the fire changed a lot throughout the journey?
The character of the. Yeah. It got more and more in depth, and its magic. The further it went, the further it was carried purely the more magic it would have around it. And it, by the time we got, the more, because it was accumulating power, like the longer that you journey with it, like, you know, if you light a fire, you're with it for 1 day, 2 day, 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, 4 month, 5 month, 6 month. And then it's like, whoa, there's a real certain energy of it, you know, and a real certain close relationship with the fire. So for me, I started to get quite emotional at the end of it, but needed to put it to rest also for relief of myself and to be free of this quest that I had been given, you know. So I made it to Ishnok, and we wanted to have loads of people there, like everyone who helped me along the way, and we wanted to have a big ceremony there with like lots of people. But with the COVID, we couldn't really with the virus. So it was just me and my mother and father that ended up being there on the day. There was a few other people that were meant to be there, but I arrived there on the 14th, and the lockdown was starting on the 15th. So the owners of Ishnok, they just gave me a ring and they said, you know, if you don't come up with the fire today, it'll have to wait off until the lockdown is over, and we never know how long that's going to happen. So if you want to come up today, that's fine. And I just went with the flow of things. I was there, and the fire was there, and that had came about. So I was just like, just go with the flow and let it go, you know. And it was absolutely beautiful. When I put it out, it was a pure, just letting go, and just flickering through everything that had happened for me to be in that position at that time. And it was just so amazing. A big ray of light like came through the sky down onto the fire. I have a video of it, actually, incredible video. And all rainbows appeared all around the fields that we were in. 5 swans like flew straight over top, like just after. So it was very symbolic that I had done something very good for the land, and it was happy. And yeah, now I'm just ingesting everything and kind of going through it all.
Oh. Wow, it's an incredible story. I mean, that's wow. I saw a video of it on Facebook, and yeah, it was very emotional.
Yeah.
And do you think that
It was the Ishnok.
did you see did you see like the diva of the fire? Did you actually ever the spirit of the fire?
Yes. So for me, it's like an old grandfather, very, very, very old man, like an old wizard in a sense, like old wise one that you can talk to, but will generally teach you things just from spending time with it. Like, do you ever sit by a fire and it almost gives you this trance state of mind? So I find it's the oldest, wisest element that we can connect to directly. As in, when I felt after it was coming through that, like, the earth was created by 4 elements. So you have 4. If you look at an ancestral family tree, it will always go back to the 4 of fire, water, earth, and wind. So those fire, water, earth, and wind created chemistry, and they created 12, and then the 12 created a million, and then the million created a billion, and then so on and so forth until humans then came into play down the line. So if you want to communicate with one of your oldest, wisest ancestral grandparents, the water, the wind, the earth, going to these and meditating and working with these elements, for me, is where you will find the deepest sense of knowledge. For me, is really in tuning yourself to the 4 grandmothers and grandfathers. They're the 4 founders of the earth. That's where I kind of.
And so when you stare at the rocks, is the earth element?
Yes, on the rocks and on the land, and yes, when you're looking at the rock, what I was getting from the readings in Norway was that rocks rocks have patterns on them, and these patterns can spark creative imagination in the mind. You know, if you look at any pattern, in my mind, I was looking at rocks at different times of the days that would have different shadows on them. The shadows would change. And if you look at old stone circles and look at the patterns that are within rocks, they can create creativity in the mind. That would be like me seeing or working with the earth, would be to meditate just staring at a rock, and just very similar as you would stare at a fire, but just with a rock.
You think that's why they made these stone circles in the past?
I think it could be that the stones that are actually in them have specific readings on them and are foretold to those who can see and read them. But the only thing I know is that I don't know. And like from all of it is like, you know, you can know everything, but if you know anything for certain, if it's a definite, you are blocked from the infinite way of thinking.
Say that again.
So if you have a definite, say like you're, as in, I know, say if I was to say I know who God is, I've seen him, I've been with him, he's there, and X, this is like, if you read this book, you'll know. And that's for definite, that this is what it is, and that's it. If within that way of thinking, you are then blocked from the infinite, an infinite way of thinking, as in you know nothing, because to know nothing is actually to be a part of the infinite, because it's never ending. There's no definite to it. So the less I know, the better, in a sense. We like never know, because then there's no fuss on trying or needing to know or telling people that I do know, because the infinite is unknown in some form or fashion, I think.
So all this journey, the wisdom that you got is that you can be sure that you know nothing.
Yeah, that I don't know anything.
That's beautiful. Oh, Darragh, well, what a story. I mean, I write, with this podcast, I write songs about all my guests and about their story. So I was thinking, you know, what can I write about you? And I don't know what, I've got to meditate on it, and because I was thinking maybe it should be like about the fire, because that's really this, you know, you're still the star, but the fire is what this is about. So
yeah, definitely. I was just a postman.
Yeah. I mean, so you think this fact that the fire energy is now in Ireland, and Ireland should, because it's still going through a lot of suffering, Ireland at the moment. I mean, but the seed is planted.
Yes, definitely. I think the seed is planted and it just needs time to grow.
Oh wow!
And it will pulse, because I do feel that the gate, the key has opened the gate, but the door still needs to be opened, but the lock has been taken off. But there is work to do.
And so, what is your plan now? What is your next, after you've digested this experience? What do you hope to do?
Yeah, I'll be moving up towards Galway, and across from Galway, there's a few different islands there, and there's quite a lot of agriculture happening on the island. So I was planning on utilizing the skills that I accumulated during the journey, and I just need to fix up my boat, and was going to do, as in, bring groups over to the island and bring them to cottages, all eco-friendly, as in you would use no unrenewable fuel. So we wouldn't use any diesel in the transportation of the people we would be bringing over to the island, or the food we'll be cooking, or the transportation of the food. So the food would be collected by horse and cart that we would use in, say, the cottage, and have like an experience that we would bring people in. They would have a dining experience that's fully ecological, And then eventually, when that is kind of in momentum, if there's an income coming off that, starting to work more deeply into a more sustainable culture on the island, that we would be producing produce, bringing it to mainland, fully sustainable, not using any unrenewable fuels or plastics or anything to bring the produce over, and selling that in mainland. And then if our produce gets going, then we can start transporting our produce throughout the country, but have to be by either sailboat or horse and cart.
Okay, fantastic. Awesome. Oh, that's
And then eventually, if we get fully sustainable, we could, start a full bartery system and, work away from the kind of governmental way of thinking.
Mhm.
And if you could create, ideally creating the owns coin on an island, creating one owns coin on an island, creating independence from a different structure,
Oh, okay.
a different way of life, and different way of thinking, and more ecological, more earthly, with more respects to the land. And I think, for me, a leader must lead by example. A great leader must lead by example, and not words and not politics, but actual physical example. So if I can create a great example on a small island of how a sustainable community can flourish, then that can be brought into a bigger picture. But first, I don't feel like me standing up and talking about everyone not doing things right is the right approach. I think actually going out there and getting into it and doing it right myself, and then bringing a template into a bigger picture would be my way forward.
Wow, that's so inspiring. And if people are listening to this, hopefully many people in the future, if they want to get in touch with you, do you have a website yet, or is it through Facebook is best? How best to?
It's Facebook. I'm going to be changing my Facebook into a public thing.
Okay.
So, but on my Facebook, you can add me on my Facebook. It's just Darragh Carroll, and on Instagram it's Darragh Carroll also. I'm not that active at the moment on them, but I do have a lot of footage that will be going up. I documented the whole trip from start to finish, so I have a huge editing process to undertake.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, it should be a movie. I mean, or you documentary. You'd like film festivals. You're a shoe in. It's an incredible story.
Amazing, Jack. I hope you do well, and all the best in the future.
All right, thanks to you. Bye, Darragh.
Good one, Jack. Peace.
A young man came upon a land where there was good and plenty. His thoughts went back to his own island, where poorly folk were many. He prayed to know what to take to them. What can one man do? 'Twas then the fire spoke to him, that I will come with you. A boat was found and ready, and they sailed on winter seas. For months the storms were fearsome, and the man so ill at ease. But the fire, fed by its brother elements, grew stronger and more bright, until the storms abated and Ireland was in sight. Once upon the green grass shore, the fire grew anew, feeding on spring energies as the earth came into bloom. By horse and cart they traveled, bringing light and food to all. The plague-ravaged population came out to heed their call. When solemn band. The man looked long into the fire, then buried it in the land. When your crops never stop growing, fill your glass to overflowing. Drink a toast to divas and the man who brought the fire. Hello and welcome to the end of the show. This is traditionally where I ask you to share the episode, rate and review it on your podcast app, and listen to the song on Spotify, iTunes, or even better, download it so you can have it forever from Podsongs.com. It's only €1 or $1, and that money goes to pay for the musicians, Mauricio San Nicola, Massimino Vodza, and my researcher Dori Verba. Thanks to you, the listener. See you next time.